Today we'll be talking about question creation. Now, if you watched our previous webinar, you'll know that this is part two of a three-part series. And this webinar will be a little bit more advanced authoring of question types. We'll be covering today sketching, free body diagrams, and math formulas with algorithms. So the previous one was more the basics, true, false, multiple choice, and numeric, and so forth. Today we'll just step up a little bit. And then our third part of this series will cover definitely more advanced algorithms, HTML, more code-heavy types of questions, and the Maple graded question types. So look for that in a couple of weeks. But for now, let's jump into part two. So let's first start with some of the more interactive question types I want to cover. Obviously, I mentioned them already, the sketching and the free body diagrams. Just to show you a few examples here. I have them ready. There are sketching questions. We'll do those first. So sketching questions is what it sounds like. It's when a student will sketch their response to a question. So here, in this case, they have a region here where they can sketch their response. So the great part is with Maple TA and Möbius is you can have multi-part questions, and typically that's how people use the sketch and response area, where they do something first. They choose what type of asymptote they do. Find the critical points or the end points or the center of something, and then they sketch out the plot at the bottom. So the tools are fairly elementary. We have lines, parabolas, absolute value functions. They can do piecewise or solutions to linear systems. Basically, they click on a tool. When they hover their mouse over each tool, it tells them how to use that particular item. In this case, to draw two lines, you click 2 points. So 1, 2. And the line is drawn. Now, to author this type of question, let me go to the question creation page and show you. So I'll go to Create New and choose Question. And here we can type in the text of our question. So I can say something very simple, sketch the parabola. And I'll say, using math here, y equals x squared plus 4. Now, as you can see, this is a question I'm having right now. If I preview it, it's just the text. So to insert that sketching region below it, I'll insert a response area and choose the question type, sketch. So the weighting will be the default of 1, axes and tick marks. So you can actually adjust these. By default, it's 10, negative 10 by positive 10 for both the y and the x. But you can adjust it up here. For example, if I put negative 100, comma 100, and then negative 10, comma positive 10, and click update, you notice that the x-axis updates at the bottom here. So basically the first parameter is the lower bound of the x-axis, the second term is the upper bound of the x-axis, and then likewise the third and fourth correspond to the lower bound of the y-axis and the upper bound of the y-axis respectively. So default is usually 10 by 10 for each one, negative 10 by 10, and that's why I usually prefer it. Tick marks. You can adjust the number of tick marks. By default, again, the first two parameters refer to the x-axis, whereas the second ones refer to the y-axis. And basically, the first one number here is the major line. So here it's at a 4. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how it splits it. And then we have 5 here. So 5 is basically how much is in between each major line. So I could put, for example, 10 if I wanted to, and 50. Click update, and notice that obviously the number of lines on the x-axis has increased greatly. Of course, I'll adjust that. I might even want to put 5 and 5. And notice we now have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections for the major lines, and then in between we have the 5 minor. And then grid. So if you want the grid, or if you change this to false and click update, notice it's gone altogether. So just another option. And then background functions. So if you want to put functions here that the student sees by default, they can't move these, they can't change them, you can list them here as well. And then the option to group the plots, by default is set to no. But then what you do as a teacher is you simply sketch the correct answer. And whatever options you use here will be available to the student when they take the question. So for example, if I only use 1 point here, then the student will only have that plot dropline point box in the tool when they actually do the question. So It is smart enough to know that. You can, of course, add them as distractors if you'd like. But for this, the answer, it's y squared, it's x squared plus 4. So I know that is the correct answer. It's at 0, 0, and then I can do 1, 1 like that, right there. So I defined the correct answer. And what happens is Maple, TA, Möbius grade this automatically. And it basically has the option to, it grades it on a tolerance level, which is either loose or strict. By default, it's right in the middle. You can edit the source of the question if you want to adjust that, but most of our authors and content creators leave it as a default. So basically, as long as the student's function is close enough, they'll still get the credit for the question. So notice that when I click on OK, it inserts the response here. I can preview it now, and you can see that the one function I want is there, and students can plot themselves a point. As I mentioned, it grades if they're close enough. So correct answer is what you see here, and as long as they're close enough, they'll still get the credit for the question. So they don't have to be exactly on the points. And now when they do go and plot, you'll notice that when they move a point, there are the x and y points to it right there. So they can see and get it close enough based off the correct answer that they're looking for. Next, I want to show you some examples of free body diagrams. Now in this case, I'm not going to create one from scratch. Instead, I'm going to open up a few that exist already and show you some samples. So for that, I'm going to go to question types, and I'm going to open up this group of free body diagram questions. So the first one I have to talk about is this sled on snow. So basically a free body diagram question. It presents a student with a picture of typically a real world situation. Now this picture in the background here is something that you create yourself. You can use your favorite editing tool on your computer, whether it's something simple like Paint or some Adobe product. You can use that as well. Basically, you have to just upload some type of JPEG or PNG image to the background. But what you do is you have the student draw what forces are at work at each control point. So this right here, this S, is a control point. You can have multiple control points on the screen. And then when students draw each force, they label and choose what type it is. And when you grade the question, it'll show the student if they got it correct or incorrect. Now the way that it currently works today is that it's an all or nothing. So they have to get all the forces here in order to get full credit. Of course, when they do label something, so let's say they label this one at the bottom and choose the type gravity and how did I do, it'll show them again if they got it correct or incorrect and what the forces should have been. So that's a very simple one. Let me clone this question and show you how it was authored. So going to the editing screen now, you'll notice that we have this free bar diagram response here already in my text. I'll double click on it to show you exactly how it was made. So the angle tolerance. This is how lenient you want to be with your grading. So you choose plus or minus this integer value, what you'll mark as correct for the functions that they draw. Below that is the image you're going to use for the particular background. And you can choose to show or hide instructions. So at the top, when they take this question, there is a little area here that tells them how to use the tool in orange. That can be hidden or shown by default. And then you choose what forces you actually want to appear within the question. So you can choose from the default list here, or you can add new ones if you'd like. And then once you select the ones you want to use, click Update Force Selection below, and it'll update for you below right here. And then you can also add control points. Like I mentioned, this one only has one control point, but you could add another one. We'll call it S2. Click, actually we'll just go to S2. Above it, click Add, and then you drag where you want this other point to go. So it's really simple. You can also choose then to delete it or to add another one, update the labels, and so forth. But below that, again, just like the sketch question, so it's a really simple process. You will label the forces yourself that are at work. So you will draw on here different forces. So you'll say, for example, the correct answer for kinetic friction is 9 degrees. Click Draw. It'll draw it on the screen. You could have said 45, and it'll draw that as well. So you define what they are, then you can adjust the length that you want for each one. Now the only thing that is graded in the free body diagram question type is the the angle of each force, and if they labeled it correctly. The length or the magnitude is not graded right now, but you can adjust it for picture purposes to make it look a certain way. And that's all you have to do for that question type. Really easy. Let me show you another example here. So I'll go back to my group here on free biodiagrams. So same idea with this question right here. There's a block in an elevator, and they have to label what forces are at work. So I will clone this into my class and again show you the screen where you modify it. And it's very similar to what you just saw before. You have to again define the angle tolerance, if you want to show instructions or not, along with the background image. And below that, you select what forces you want to appear. So notice that this list is different than what you saw in the previous one. But below that, they chose to show what forces are at work. In this case, only 2. But that's how you create a free body diagram question. I'm going to show you one more question type today. As I mentioned, we did the basic ones in part 1 of this webinar series. Part 3, which will happen in a few weeks, will cover the more advanced question types that involve more algorithms and coding from Maple itself and HTML. I want to show you now the mathematical formula question type. This one is very powerful in our software for a few specific reasons, and I'll show you that during the demonstration. So here I have a question, math formula. And math formula is great because, of course, it can be algorithmic, as you see here. In this example, x to the exponent 7. If I refresh, notice it changes to x squared, x exponent 20, and so forth. But the question is always the same. What's the derivative of this particular function? And the students can answer it using either text like you see here, or they can actually answer the question using the equation editor. And they can see how they did, and I'll tell them if they got it correct or incorrect. Now what's great is that this question grades for math equivalency automatically. So what I mean is, if it's mathematically equivalent, if what they type in themselves is equivalent mathematically to what the teacher defines as correct, it'll still be marked as the correct answer no matter what. So in this case, let's say they type in x squared, x exponent 7, 8 times x, and then they, for some reason add a constant, but below that they had, another number in front of it. As long as it's mathematically equivalent, like you see here, it's still marked correct. So this is very helpful for when you have more complicated expressions, perhaps things using trigonometry, perhaps using radicals and things like that. This will grade things for you automatically. You don't have to worry about defining all the possible correct answers. You don't have to even worry about input. So whether the students put, a space character for multiplication or nothing, or the, asterisk symbol, it doesn't matter. As long as it's mathematically equivalent, it's marked correct. And that's because our software, both Maple T and Möbius, have that Maple engine built into the platform. So let's make this question. I'm going to create a new one, and we'll call this derivative. And in this case, let's first just do a static version. What I mean is, basically we'll ask the students the same question. I'll hard code it here. I'll say, what is the derivative of, and I'll just type in, x to the exponent 5. That's the question. And then below that, I put the response here, and I choose, in this case, math formula. So what you have to do is define a weighting, of course, but then you have to choose, most importantly, the subtype. So there are 10 different subtypes to choose from, and they all behave slightly differently. So for example, the most popular ones that you'll use are probably formula or equation or one of the lists. Formula will expect that the answer is simply a formula that you type in, no exemptions. Below that is formula without logs and trig. So it's a more stripped down version, typically only involving fractions or addition, the basic operands. Below that is formula with physical units. This is where the answer contains not only a formula, but also a unit itself. And then formula that matches response to within plus c, so within plus a constant, and then without simplification. So in this case, let's say you want them to respond to a question. Perhaps the question is along the lines, reduce this fraction to lowest terms, or convert this parabola into, vector format or something. In this case, you don't want them to grade for equivalency. You want them to put their response in a certain way or format. If you select this option from the drop-down menu, it'll avoid the comma simplifications and only look for certain things. Equation means the response contains an equal sign. Below that is an unordered list of formulas, and then below that is an ordered list of formulas. So if you want it to be unordered or the order doesn't matter to you, choose one or the other. Vectors of formulas means that the response is in the example there, where it's wrapped in parentheses separated by commas. And then the chemical equations. So if you want the response to be using chemical equation notation, choose that option right there. So in our case, the answer is simply 5 times x to exponent 4. In this case, I'm fine with just a generic formula. In my opinion, when you create these questions, you yourselves will probably most of the time use formula or equation. But there's the correct answer. Click on preview and to try it out. So here's the question, 5x to exponent 4. How did I do? I get it marked correct. So it's static though. Let's make it algorithmic. I'll scroll down to the algorithm section. And I touched on this very briefly in part 1, but I recommend using the designer at first until you're comfortable with the syntax. Basically, we're going to create a random number between 2 and 10. So I'll say, n1 is a whole number between 2 and 10 in steps of 1. So it's an integer between 2 and 10. I'll click add right here, and it adds that n1 for me at the bottom here. So what this does is it creates the syntax for me. N1 is an algorithmic variable which is equal to the result of this command, which picks a random integer between 2 and 10. I can click on refresh to see how it looks, so it's looking proper. I can even adjust it to say, okay, instead of 2 to 10, I'll say 220. And now it picks the random integer between 2 and 20. Now let's put this back into our question. So I'll change first the question. You want to replace the exponent with the algorithmic variable. So what you do is you just refer to it like it does in the algorithm section. You say $n1. Now that is the question itself. You still have to define the correct answer. And you might be wondering, well, how do you do that? Well, it's easy. You just use those variables and you put them as the answer instead of what you typed in statically. So in our case, it's pretty simple. The answer is, of course, $n1 to exponent $n1 minus 1. So basically, I just typed in the power rule. Depending on what question you're asking, you might have to become creative with your answer using algorithmic variables, and that's okay. You basically have to type in mathematically how you would get to that correct answer. Click OK, and notice when I preview the question now, it's algorithmic, meaning that what is the derivative of x cubed? Click refresh. If I see how would I do, so in this case I'll get the question wrong. You'll get it wrong, but I'll tell you the correct answer with respect to how you typed it in. And of course, just like I mentioned in part 1, with all these questions, you can always include, as you see here, feedback the student will receive when they complete the question. So whether it's a video that they have to watch, or you have to refer them to notes or to office hours or tutorial sections if you would, you can always put that under the feedback area. The custom CSS is where you go to define a custom look and feel for each question individually apart from each other. And then the author notes. You can type in whatever notes you want here, and they're saved to the question itself. Students won't see these. Only people who author or modify the question will have the option to see it. So this just helps you if you want to share with other authors and creators this question, and they look at it. They can see kind of what you were thinking when you authored the question. If you want to put some notes here that they can have just kind of for reference, why you chose certain algorithmic numbers, what ones to avoid maybe. That's all possible here. So that's today's webinar, part 2 on creating questions. A little bit harder than part 1, but still a good and easy solution for doing more interactive question types. In part 3, like I mentioned, we'll be covering definitely more complicated types of questions like the maple graded, HTML. I'll do some more advanced algorithms as well for you to see. So I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and be sure to check out the other parts if you'd like to learn more.